Spring 1858, Manhattan, New York. The news reached Egbert Ville on a Thursday morning. The Central Park Commission had gone to Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. Their design, called Greensward, had beaten 32 other entries. Ville's plan, the one he had spent 2 years developing after conducting the first comprehensive topographical survey of the park site himself, had not placed. He was 32 years old, a West Point graduate who had left a promising military career to stake his professional future on the most ambitious public works project in the city's history. He had walked every acre of the park site personally, mapping its rocky outcrops, its swampy margins, its buried watercourses. His survey had made Olmsted's design possible. The commission had gone to the men who used his data to build something more elegant than he had imagined. Ville did not contest the decision publicly. He turned instead to a project that had been forming since those first months of walking the park's terrain. He had noticed something that most city engineers had not thought to look for. Manhattan had been built with almost complete indifference to what lay beneath it. Not the bedrock, which engineers understood. The watercourses, the brooks and streams and seasonal channels that had been covered over by the grid, buried by fill, paved into invisibility. The water was still there. It had nowhere else to go. Every flooding basement, every road that cracked without obvious cause, every foundation that required unexpected reinforcement. These were the consequences of a city built over water it had refused to acknowledge. Someone needed to document precisely where all of it was. Ville began that autumn, and he did not stop for 9 years. The creek he would eventually map with the most care had been called many things. Dutch settlers knew it as Bestevaers Killetje. The name most New Yorkers used, Minetta, possibly from the Lenape word Minette, meaning spirit water, or from the Dutch Minnetje, the little one, had been assigned so long ago that no one could say with certainty which came first, the name or its meaning. Both seemed appropriate. The creek was small, it was also permanent. For 2 miles, Minetta Brook flowed from twin tributaries, one originating near what is now 5th Avenue and 21st Street, another near 6th Avenue and 16th Street, merging near the corner of modern 5th and 11th, before running southwest through a low valley and emptying into the Hudson River near Charlton Street. In the 18th century, the brook supported native brook trout. Colonial records describe it as a reliable fishing stream, visible on nearly every early map of the island. By the 1820s, it was neither. Manhattan's population had grown from 60,000 at the turn of the century to over 120,000. And the city's grid plan, imposed on the island's topography in 1811 by men who had not been asked to consult the land beneath their feet, demanded that every stream, pond, and tidal marsh be drained or buried. Minetta Brook had become an open sewer running through a neighborhood of free black New Yorkers, Irish immigrants, and tradespeople who lived there because the rents were low and the flooding was manageable most of the year. The Common Council ordered it covered through the 1820s and early 1830s. Culverts were laid. Streets were paved above them. The brook was officially declared finished. The water continued flowing. No one who lived on Minetta Lane was surprised. Ville spent the next 9 years building a document the city had not requested, and that it would, for most of his lifetime, decline to use. He called it the Sanitary and Topographical Map of the City and Island of New York. The methodology was exact. He consulted Dutch colonial land records stretching back to the 1640s, grants, deeds, and boundary surveys that named every feature of the original landscape. He examined drainage gradients against subsurface topography, cross-referencing each natural watercourse with the documented history of flooding, structural failure, and unexplained groundwater in the streets above. He interviewed elderly residents who remembered features of the landscape buried within living memory. He walked every block of the island himself. The result, completed in 1865, showed Manhattan not as it had been built, but as it had been found, a complicated, spring-fed, waterlogged island on which the grid had been imposed. Minetta Brook appeared in precise detail. The twin tributaries, their meeting point near Washington Square, the low valley running southwest through Greenwich Village, the route to the Hudson. Dozens of other buried watercourses surrounded it. Collect Pond, whose filled basin had become the city's most structurally unstable neighborhood. The streams that still fed, invisibly, into the foundations of buildings whose owners believed they were standing on solid ground. Ville presented the map to city planners. He published, He advocated for mandatory subsurface surveys before construction permits were issued. The city was completing the most ambitious building program in its history. Nobody stopped to look down. The original burial of Minetta Brook had not been an engineering achievement. It had been an administrative decision, executed with the speed of a city that needed the problem to stop being visible. Beginning in the 1820s, the Common Council authorized the construction of brick culverts along the brook's course, arched masonry channels designed to carry the brook underground. The brook's flow was fed by a network of underground springs in the bedrock beneath Lower Manhattan, an aquifer system that the culvert construction neither mapped nor interrupted. Water that had been seeping upward through fractures in Manhattan's schist and gneiss for geological time continued to do so after the brick was laid. By the time Villa began his surveys, the brook existed in 3 simultaneous states, confined within its culverts along the original channel, seeping through fractured masonry into the foundations of buildings on either side, and pooling in the low-lying areas of the valley where the water table had no other exit. At its deepest point, the brook ran approximately 20 feet below street level, directly beneath the intersection of 2 narrow streets, whose winding, illogical courses through Greenwich Village's otherwise rigid grid traced the brook's original path exactly. The streets had been named for the water they covered. They still are. In the autumn of 1865, with the Civil War 6 months ended and New York absorbing its consequences, Villa deposited his completed map with the commissioners of the Department of Parks. It was a document of precision that nothing comparable would match for another century. Every watercourse was traced. Every buried stream was named. Minetta Brook's course was shown in the kind of detail that made it possible, for the first time since the 1820s burial, to understand exactly what lay beneath Greenwich Village. The city did not change its building practices. Development continued at the same pace along the same corridors. Permits were issued without subsurface surveys. Foundations were sunk into ground the map showed to be saturated with active water. The consequences were not hypothetical. A row of townhouses on West 10th Street, built directly over the brook's path in the 1850s, required continuous basement pumping by the 1870s. A building on Minetta Lane required emergency waterproofing after its floor flooded overnight in the autumn of 1878. A section of pavement on McDougal Street, above a point where 2 of the brook's historical channels converged, settled twice within a single decade and required repeated recompaction with no identified cause. Villa had not changed New York. He had documented it truthfully, which is a different kind of permanence. Egbert Villa died in April 1902 at 76, having spent 4 decades watching the city build on top of what he had mapped. He died in a Manhattan of 3 million people, of elevated railways and electric light and department stores occupying whole city blocks. Within 2 years, work began on Pennsylvania Station, a project requiring excavation across a full city block to bedrock, deeper into Manhattan's subsurface than any civilian construction had previously attempted. Engineers encountered groundwater at depths and in locations that contradicted expectations drawn from standard geological surveys. Contemporary accounts describe continuous pumping operations and the unexpected rerouting of drainage systems at considerable additional cost. What the record does confirm is that the groundwater was there, in the locations he had documented, behaving exactly as he said it would. Minetta Brook continued its argument through the 20th century. Construction crews digging along 6th Avenue in the 1930s encountered clear, cold water that puzzled engineers who had not consulted the map. A building on Minetta Street required emergency waterproofing in 1953 after its basement filled overnight during a period of heavy rain. Development projects near Washington Square in the 1960s reported groundwater at foundation depth well above the levels their surveys had projected. The brook did not announce itself. It simply appeared each time in the location a dead engineer had recorded 90 years before. Minetta Brook still flows. Beneath the intersection of Minetta Lane and Minetta Street, 2 of the few streets in Lower Manhattan that refuse to obey the grid, bending and narrowing through Greenwich Village along a logic older than the city above them. The brook continues on its original course toward the Hudson. The streets that trace it still bear its name. The low ground of the valley it carved still drains differently from the blocks on either side. Egbert Villa's map, now held at the New York Public Library in the Lionel Pincus and Princess Furial Map Division, remains in active use. The New York City Department of Environmental Protection references it in planning assessments. FEMA flood zone designations for Lower Manhattan correspond, in material ways, to the areas Ville identified as saturated ground in 1865. Washington Square Park's central fountain sits almost directly above the brook's former course. The cherry trees along its western edge root into soil that drains differently from the rest of the park. Ville spent a professional lifetime trying to make New York understand what lay beneath it. He was largely dismissed while he lived and proved continuously right after he died. The map he made in 9 years of unrecognized work became, a century later, a document that prevents buildings from falling. This particular stream, still moving beneath the streets it carved before the city existed, still surfacing in the basements of buildings whose owners had not been warned, is a monument to everything that imposition never quite managed to resolve. Over 200 years after it was buried, it is still making the point.